Good, that works. Pastor makes fun of me calling it mything the truth, lisping and a few other things. I can't call it missing the truth because missing implies that they're actually looking for the truth. And I think they're making stories. So that's why I call it missing the truth. We'll talk about those images here a little bit later. But let's go ahead and get started with prayer first. Let's bow our heads. Holy God, again, we thank you for the blessings you bestowed upon us. We thank you for truth. We thank you for your word and for the opportunity we have to study together, to learn together, and to see your truth around the world. I mean, you've just left us with so much evidence, and the Bible is the framework and the support for all of it. We thank and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, yeah, as Spurgeon says here, the Bible contains what men hate, the truth. Amos says here, they abhor him who speaks the truth. I started the series, well, I don't remember, so why should I expect you guys to remember? But it was some time ago. But I started it after watching this series with Graham Hancock. It was an interesting series, but his conclusions I couldn't quite agree with. He was looking for the Atlanteans, who were the ones who were bringing all this advanced civilizations to fruition. So that was interesting. I mean, it was interesting, the archaeology he was uncovering, but I couldn't agree with his final conclusions. Start with a false premise, you'll end up with a false conclusion. But it's interesting, Matt Walsh had something to say about this very recently. He had a video on YouTube where he talks why about the left hates this documentary, talking about Graham Hancock's archaeological commentary. Why do they hate it so much? And he had pretty much the same conclusion I had. It was interesting, but there was stuff he couldn't agree with. But what he had a problem with was this article in The Guardian. Ancient Apocalypse is the most dangerous show on Netflix. Well, why is it dangerous? Well, we got our first clue right here at the bottom. A show for people who like to shout at Twitter. Well, what's that supposed to mean? Well, this article is written by Betty Reed, and I thought it was interesting. That's the danger of this show like this. It whispers to conspiracy theorists and all of us, and Hancock is such a compelling host that he's bound to create a few more in his wake. Believing that ultra-intelligent creatures helped to build the pyramids is one thing, but where does it end? Believing the election fraud is real? Believing 9/11 was an inside job? Worse? So she goes through this progression to see how bad it is or how ridiculous it is to believe in this stuff. I have a problem with this line here. For those of us who went through the Dino Rossi, Christine Gregoire thing, we've seen fraud. We know where that's at. Is it enough to change elections? Well, it could be, but to just be dismissive of it is troublesome. But what bothers me more is this phrase right here. Believing that ultra-intelligent creatures helped to build the pyramid is one thing, but where does it end? Okay, so the whole premise I've been talking about this series is that man is not on the ascendancy, but that's what the naturalists say. We came from goo, through the zoo, to you, one step at a time, just continually increasing to something better. We are the pinnacle of our civilization. Well, the biblical view is that we're on the decline. We're not as genetically pure as Adam and Eve. We've declined, and it's because of sin. We're on a downward trend. But that's not what she's saying here. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouths of fools pours out folly. Well, I go to my go-to source for information, the Babylon Bee. You've seen this one? Or Kevin Sorbo says some of the same things. I'm no longer the guy that identifies as a conspiracy theorist. You may now refer to me as the guy who's right all along. Okay. Well, I think the basis for this series is a book that Chris Ashcraft has donated to our church library. I saw that and I said, that's fascinating. Let me borrow it. So I devoured it, went and bought my own copy. And I did turn the other one back into the library, so it is there. You should be able to check it out unless somebody's already checked it out. But Dennis Swift is the author of that. I think he's a pastor down in Oregon, along with a couple other credentialed degrees. But he's written this book. He's been on Northwest Creation with, in fact, Chris Ashcraft is in a couple of videos that talk about the Ica stones, and Dennis Swift is one of the speakers he has, and then he has another video with another speaker who I can't remember, who kind of reiterated some of the stuff that Dennis Swift has here. But Graham Hancock had something to say about these Ica stones. Well, actually, his website, not him himself. He had somebody else who wrote this article, Brian Forrester, The Mysterious Ica Stones of Peru, Ancient Enigma or Fraud? So they're labeled as fraud, but why? Wikipedia, which is always a trustworthy source, says this: the Ica stones are a collection of andesite stones from the Inca province in Peru, known as the engraved motifs, largely regarded to be modern hoaxes. Well, when I first started doing some research after I looked at the book and got online, of course, you can find everything online, some of it's good, some of it bad, but I found a YouTube video from a guy who called himself the truth what? I can't remember, doesn't matter. You can find him if you want to, but I don't care. Because he had a lot of things to say negative about this whole process. He, as a detractor, and this is repeated in a lot of other people too, is the stones were found in a secret cave that no one knows where it's at. They were actually all manufactured by a poor farmer because he couldn't get enough money for his crops, so he started making these stones. Well, the problem that a lot of people have with the stones is they have humans and dinosaurs on the same stones. And Chris Ashcraft has showed us that we have many accounts worldwide of that stuff, so why not some other stones? So if we believe in dragons, why not here? Well, they're not going to, but they have problems with the person who has these stones, okay? One of the things he says is that dinosaurs that they depict don't have any feathers. Well, why would they have feathers? Well, because the current naturalists say that dinosaurs have feathers because they're evolving to birds. Well, here's what I got to say about that. The stones have been found all over Peru in caves, tombs, and other places. They know where they are. Father Simon reported finding them sometime in 1525. So this farmer is really a lot older than we expect. Okay? The ancient stones have a varnish over them that has formed over hundreds of thousands of years. Well, hundreds or thousands of years, excuse me. When the varnish is removed, the lighter color lines appear. When the carvings on the stones were examined, it was found that the carvings themselves had some varnish on them as well, indicating that the carvings are also of ancient origin. Because the vast number of these stones, it would be difficult for one individual or even a few farmers to fabricate them in a short period of time. But some of the more convincing evidence is that there was a house that was built in 1920s that when it was taken down, underneath the foundation they found, I guess they used a lot of these stones for foundation stones in 1920. So this farmer, if he's died in the 70s or something like that, he would have been 10 or 20 when he was carving these stones. So why would he hide them, a bunch of them under the house? So, at any rate, seems a little bit of a stretch. But there's another thing here. The dinosaurs do not have any feathers. So, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too, because I do have an image I want to show you on that. All right? I remember the original, in addition to not finding feathers, the original in the 60s and 70s, the detractors said, well, the dinosaurs that they drew were inaccurate because they held their tails up off the ground. They didn't drag them like dinosaurs would. Well, now those naturalists say, well, actually, there's no indication that the dinosaurs dragged their tails, so they must have lifted them up. Okay, but this is your proof that these stones are wrong? All right. Let's go from dinosaurs to aliens, everybody's favorite topic. And let me tell you, when you start looking at Ica stones and Nazca lines, you're going to see a lot of stuff from people who say aliens are involved with this. And when I was a teenager, before I became a Christian, I did read Eric von Daniken's book. And it was, oh, wow, it was pretty cool. But none of it is factual. But at any rate, UFOs, we all know what that stands for, unidentified flying objects. Does anybody know what UAP stand for? All right, Mr. Bellman knows. Who else knows? Yeah, exactly. Unexplained aerial phenomena. Okay, that's the new term, because what they have seen is that, well, maybe it's not a flying object. Maybe it's just something that causes something to happen in the air that we see. So, don't know. But why am I bringing this up with the Nazca lines, apart from the fact that Eric von Daniken mentions it? Well, here's some of the Nazca lines. There's a whole bunch more than these, but these are the big ones that everybody kind of looks at, okay? But I want you to look at one specific one. Astronautae. I think that's Spanish for astronaut. Is that right, Pastor? Okay. That's supposed to be an astronaut. Here's the picture of it. Sorry, it's a Getty image, but that's the picture of it. Actually, here's a better picture. I like this one better. It's on the side of a mountain. But here's what some others actually think it is. It looks like not an astronaut, but a happy fisherman. Hey, look at this catch I got. Isn't that cool? Okay, let's talk about aliens and why the problem I have with ancient astronauts. Fermi paradox. I know Mr. Bellman knows what the Fermi paradox is. Do you?
Actually, I don't remember.
Okay. Wet my whistle as I go into this explanation. Enrico Fermi was an Italian-American physicist who helped with the building of the bomb. He was the one who helped put together the first atomic pile in Chicago. And he and some of his fellow physicists in the summer of 1950, of course this is after the war, but they're having a conversation and they started talking about the plausibility of alien life and how it could be and whatever. And during lunch, after they had had that conversation, Enrico suddenly blurted out, "But where are they?" Because if there are billions of planets capable of supporting life, the law of large numbers indicates that extraterrestrial life should not be rare. Why haven't any visited Earth? Basically, it comes down to two possibilities. Life is difficult to start or evolve, or and two, advanced civilizations destroy themselves before colonizing space. This paradox, well, you can see right there, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said, two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe or we're not. Both are equally terrifying. Well, how do I resolve this? Genesis tells us where we started. Revelation tells us where we're going. And it doesn't say anything about having to worry about aliens. Nothing. I don't believe in aliens or the Fermi paradox because God doesn't tell me about them. So I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, we're done. No. Okay. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking. Oh my. And their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. All right, so let's talk about the stones. We're going to look at each one of these stones tonight. No, I'm just kidding. This guy right here, Dr. Javier Cabrera, I don't know how to say that last part of that name, Darque or something like that. Well, he has a museum, and he started collecting a lot of these when some people brought them to him, and he started purchasing some from farmers and from other people when he acquired them. So he's got the biggest collection that's known. He's probably got like 15,000, something like that. There are 30,000 some known stones, 20 to 30,000 known stones, depending on who you talk to. But he's got the biggest collection. He'll let people look at it, but he's got some weird ideas himself, and so that might be part of the reason that it's considered a hoax. According to the Cabrera, the stones were made by an ancient type of human, which is called the glyptolithic man, who had larger brains than modern humans and could use their psychic energy to influence events in outer space. Okay, so that adds a lot of credibility to that, but does that make the stones wrong? But the detractors say that he and a couple of farmers are the ones who rigged this whole thing together. Primarily, they're concerned with astronauts and, well, we'll talk about a couple other things here. These are actually the stones we're going to look at. No, this is only part of his collection. I showed you one part, and then there's another part. Well, where did all these stones come from? Okay? Because we can't date them, oh, can that? Oh, you can't even read that one. Sorry. Let's go to the next one then. What we're looking at here is this area right here, 500 BC to maybe 1000 AD, and we're looking at Parkas and Nazca, or that should be Navca, but they say Nazca in some places. But if you put Nazca in internet search, you come up with NASCAR. Okay, and then the Ica, which were after the, and then of course the Incas, which they pronounce here, and then Spanish. All right, so that's the time frame we're looking at here. But here's the problem with the history in the Americans, and I don't think this is just with America, this is all over the place. The period of time for which we have written record, we still pull information from art buildings, funerary artifacts, and other archaeological remains. And I find that interesting. Other archaeological remains means junk piles, where they dump their trash. Okay? The big point they're trying to say here is that there's not a lot of written records that we can understand. Part of it is when the conquistadors came in and took over the place, they burned a lot of that stuff. They got rid of a lot of the written records because it was pagan. Okay? Trying to push everybody into a new religion, which ultimately accepted some of the beliefs they had, but they lost the legacy of what they had. So, good and bad involved with that. But going back to the junk piles where they pull some of this information out of, Kathy and I watched a show here recently from the Biblical Archaeological Society, which I thought was interesting. They went to a dig near Mount Ebal, but they didn't have permission to do the dig. So what they did is they went through the trash piles of the former archaeologists who had dug through it already. In other words, they sifted through information and they pulled stuff out and they said, okay, this is just trash, we'll dump it over here. So because they didn't have permission to dig the actual site where this historical artifact was, they could only go through the trash piles of those people. This is what they found. Oh, what is that? Looks like a Wheaties or something. That's a lead tablet that when they wouldn't be able to peel it open because it was so brittle, but they had to do that radioactive layering to see what the layer said. It's written in Proto-Hebrew, and it's called the Curse Tablet. Now, I believe it's in Joshua where we talk about where they got the tribes together and they went on two mountains, Mount Ebal, and I can't remember the name of the other one, and they would go through the blessings and the cursings. And one side would say the blessings and the other side would say the cursings. Like we did with that song earlier where we had the women sing and the men sing. So the women were giving out the curses and the men were giving out the blessings. No. No, I think it was by tribes. I don't know how they did that, but there's a city on the other mountain there's not much archaeological stuff left. But in Mount Ebal, there wasn't anything. But they had an archaeological dig, and the guy who was digging it didn't believe in the Bible and didn't resort to the Bible at all. When they were going through it, he was trying to figure out what this place was, and it was one of the interns who came to him and says, I think this is the I think this is part of the Mount Ebal I can't remember the term for it. So anyway, part of Mount Ebal from the Bible. And he said, what, really? And so he showed him in the Bible. He says, oh, okay. But he didn't think much else of it. So, but the biblical group, much later, of course, this is back in like 40s and 50s, I think, when he was doing this. But it was through the trash piles that they found this artifact, which I thought was interesting. So even if an archaeologist gets to it, doesn't mean that it's going to be checked out right. And that's one of the problems that they have with this right now, is that the biblical archaeologists are saying this thing is legit, but some of the other archaeologists are saying it can't be legit because you don't really know where it came from. Well, it came from this trash pile. Well, how did it get in that trash pile? Oh my, some of these people. Speaking of dead things buried in the ground, this is a tomb. And this is one of the Ica stones down in the tomb. A lot of the stones are found in tombs. The problem that Cabrera has with collecting them is that the people who sold them to him are grave robbers. And there's a big thing in Peru about being a grave robber. You can get put into jail for life. Well, it's probably a shorter sentence than that, but they don't give you any food unless you have somebody rich enough to throw food to you. You don't get fed. So you probably die in prison if you go there. So grave robbers are not very open about where they find this stuff. But some legitimate archaeologists have found stones in legitimate tombs. Here's one of these tombs. And I don't know if these are two short, fat dwarfs or how it is they put them together, but I don't know if that's an Ica stone down there in the bottom or not. But here's what the stones look like. Different artifacts on them, different drawings that are put on them. So what is that? What are they? Lots and lots of stones. Okay, this article, and I put the QR code up there if you want to go take a look at that. It was on Answers in Genesis. And if you do a search on Ica stones, you'll come up with a couple articles. One is on Thunderbirds, which we'll talk about. And then there's this article here, which talks about things that are easy for creationists to talk about, and yes, these are legit, and then they have a section about what's not legit to talk about. Then they have one special section in the middle about things we may want to be careful about. Ica stones is one of them. Not because they necessarily don't believe them, but because it is considered such a big hoax. So that might be an issue. So what are the Ica stones? The selfie, maybe? They got a lot of, depends on some of them, what's this guy doing to them? They've got medical procedures all over the place that they're doing with these. Here's an actual better picture. Here's a guy, it looks like he's tattooing his arm, but he's also shown his digestive tract. So, I don't know. Here's a more gruesome picture. But this is documented, and actually a lot of ancient places where they do this procedure called, I have to look it up, trephining. And I'm probably mispronouncing that. But it's where they'll cut into the skull without going into the brain tissue to relieve pressure or something. Some people speculate that they're doing it to do, get spiritual access to stuff or something like that. But they don't know what the ancient people are doing. It's not commonly practiced today unless they have to relieve some pressure, because not many people survive it. But back then, they have evidence. The skull, like, I don't know if this is one of the skulls that they did this, but there's a book called A Hole in the Head. It's a series of essays where in some of the archaeological finds, it's an expensive book and probably too detailed, so I did not buy this one. But it shows that some of these ancient people who have had this procedure done to them have survived for numerous years because of the healing done in their brain. I mean, they don't, on their skulls. They don't get a whole new pad back. They always have a hole in their head. You could do something with that. I'm not going to. Okay? But apparently they had success with it. People survived it. But not just in South America, where this tool is shown. But I saw an article recently, earliest brain surgery in the Middle East found in Israel. The remains of two brothers were uncovered beneath the floor of a late Bronze Era building during an excavation of Tel Megiddo. The shocking part of the find came when one of the skulls was found to have undergone a precise surgical procedure called trephination, where a hole is carefully cut in the skull without affecting the underlying tissue. So that's in the Middle East. So it's happened in other places too. Now here's an Ica stone with a heart on it. Looks pretty good. When I was in ultrasound, you know, I had to, because we did a lot of imaging of the hearts, I had to go through a class with some doctors to take a look at what was going on in there. And that looked like it could have come from one of the books we used. Well, where are these stones found? Well, you might think the Aztecs, we know they cut people's hearts out. But they're all the way up here in Middle America. Notice up here with the Olmecs in the very top. But this is the area we're looking at. Let me go to this picture because this actually shows it better. But these are some of the mysteries we have, A, B, and C, towards the southern part of Peru. We have the Sacsayhuman, if I can say that, site, which is where they got a lot of stones that are meticulously cut to fit into their artifacts. And then they have, of course, Mocha Picchu, and then the Nazca lines. And we're going to talk about that spider here in a couple of minutes too. Here's a better picture of Mocha Picchu because I like the llama there. So, or is that an alpaca? Anybody know? I can't tell the difference between them. It's interesting. You hear about the South Americans not knowing about the wheel, but they have toys with wheels on them. Well, the big thing is that they didn't have pack animals that could pull a big wagon. And with hills like this, you're not going to want to do it yourself. So they pack them on a lot of llamas and not pull something. What's interesting about Nazca lines, we're going to talk about that next, is this is a confusing thing and it doesn't look as good as it did on my home computer. So I got a better one here. But what I want to show you here, the blue lines here is cold water coming up from Antarctica. Peru and Chile, for South America, have some of the driest deserts in the world. They're in Africa too, along for the same reason, except in North Africa where you've got some big deserts up there too. But when I was looking at the stuff about the flood and the ice age, you have to have warm water to be able to create the moisture for snow and rain, actually. If you have cold water, there's very little moisture coming out of the ocean that could be blown up over the mountains. And all the mountains coming from the Atlantic are stopped by the Andes. They go back to Brazil, to the Amazon. Here's a better picture of Peru, the area we're looking for. Okay, Cusco, which is where that Sacsayhuman or whatever place is, Mocha Picchu, and Ica and Nazca, right down here on the coastline. And they're closely related. The Ica stones, most of them were first found in Ica, so that's why they call them Ica stones. And was it the Ica Indians who made them? We don't know. Or was it the Nazca Indians? But they're kind of found in the same place. But here's one that causes some of the controversy. Is this guy flying a pterodactyl? And then again, is this real or not? We read earlier where we can tell some of the stones for the patina that grows over that or develops over it over hundreds of years. And the farmers said that they could try to fake it. But the faking doesn't look as good as the real stuff. The problem is being able to get authorized, papered archaeologists to look at this stuff. They're very dismissive when they see a dinosaur. Nah, dinosaurs are men. I remember I was in elementary school and being the oldest kid telling my younger brothers and sisters that Fred Flintstone couldn't have had a dinosaur because dinosaurs died out way before man came along. I was so smart. I'm smarter now. Okay.
Honestly, it looks like a chocobo from the Final Fantasy series.
Uh-oh.
Giant bird that
You mean like this one?
has a horse. Kind of.
Now, that's a big bird. That's a, how do you say that? Quetzalcoatlus, okay? But the Thunderbirds, and remember I mentioned Answers in Genesis has an article on the Thunderbirds, but there's stories of Thunderbirds from Alaska all the way down to South America. Let's see, Indians attributed thunder and lightning to these birds. The thunder resulted from the flapping of their wings, while bolts of lightning proceeded from their mouths. The impressive size of the Thunderbirds meant that during midday flight, they would cast strikingly large shadows upon the ground. And this is a story I'd heard before, which I thought was interesting, but the Sioux Indians tell a story about an experience some of their warriors had with a Thunderbird that perfectly fits the description of a pterodon. One day long, long ago, before the white man came to America, a party of Sioux Indian warriors were out hunting. They had left the village far behind. Before they realized it, the group of braves found themselves alone in the barren, rocky badlands of the west. Suddenly the sky darkened. There was a clap of thunder that shook the earth. Looking up in terror, the Indians thought they saw the shape of a giant bird falling to earth. The band of hunters traveled over the badlands for days until they came at last to the spot where they thought the giant bird had fallen. Nothing was left of the terrible creature but its bones. The Indians shuddered as they looked at the monster skeleton. The bird had fallen so hard that they thought that his bones were partly sunk into the ground, but the braves could see that its wingspan was as big as 4 tall men standing on top of one another. The strange creature had fierce claws on its wings as well as on its feet. The beak was long and sharp, and there was a long bony crest on its head. The Indians knew that they had never seen a bird like it before. Now, if this is a description in some of the story accounts from the Sioux Indians, before we find dinosaur bones, what are their chances of manufacturing this out of some story? So, I don't know. But what if the Nazca would ride a pterodon to see the Nazca lines? Can't adhere to that, don't know. But could it also be, now what is this? Looks like a dog talking into a cell phone or something. But it's supposed to be a depiction of possibly of a balloon with a basket under it. Well, in the 1970s, an American by the name of Jim Woodman set out to prove this new and radical Nazca line theory that they use hot air balloons to see them. While both the purpose and construction of the Nazca Desert geoglyphs have often divided scholarly opinion, Woodman's idea was to come quite literally out of the blue. Could the Nazca civilization have built and flown the world's first hot air balloon? Now, Dennis Swift in his book talks about the fact that they found cloth that the Nazca or the Ica had made that was so finely, the loom was so close, more than what we do today, that it could possibly hold air in a hot air balloon. But his idea is instead of, well, maybe some of the elites could have gone up there, but the problem is when they send the hot air balloons up, as the air cools, they'd be blown out to sea. And so he puts in there, and I don't think he's the source of it, but I don't know what the source is, but that they may have sent some of the elite bodies up as they died. They put them on a pallet and then put these balloons up and then let them go up into the sky, and then they'd be blown out to sea where they'd be buried at sea. So, possibility? Don't know. Okay. Now here's one with one of the dinosaurs, a sauropod in this one, but notice the little circles on the side. This one looks more like a stegosaurus with some of the, actually here's a better picture I think, on its back. And then there's this one. This is a guy, it looks like a whistle scaring this cat. Actually, it's not. It's Peril the dog. See if we can take a closer look at that. Peril the dog. That's an odd-looking dog. I looked at that and I said, why has it got 5 legs? And then I looked, in one of the articles I said, well, it's not 5 legs, but there's an interesting number of toes on it, but it might be 2 tails. And I'm wondering if it's like a cartoon showing the tail moving or wagging. But it's hard to tell. We know, nobody knows. So, at any rate, here's what the Nazca lines look like on the ground level. They make them a couple of ways. They either just move the rocks away so that you can see the bottom, or they kind of pile them up in the middle. But it's so dry out there, and the weather there's not much rain or wind out there, that they never get disturbed. This is the one I want to talk about, though, the spider. Why is this? Some say it's an ant, but a lot of people think it's more likely it's this spider right here. And none of them can explain what that thing is coming out of its leg, but this spider has, for reproductive purposes, has a protrusion that comes out of its foot on that one back leg, which fits with this. The Reconuli, whatever, that's the type of spider, are known as hooded tick spiders. There are between 50 to 60 species of Reconuloids, all in one family. They occur in the rainforests of western and central Africa and in the caves and forests from Texas to Peru. These small arachnids are 5 to 10 millimeters in length. I could put 3 of them across my finger, end to end. That's how small they are. You can't see his leg without a microscope. So did they have microscopes back then? Well, we're sure they had, the Ica had, or whoever made the stones, had lenses, because on the one on the left, it looks like they're looking at stars. But is this one, is he looking at something on the ground? Like a microscope? Because we wouldn't probably expect a mechanical microscope like we have. It'd be something else. So they were able to see this and then draw this. Let me back up here. Draw this giant spider. Okay, it doesn't exactly look like it, but that's what they think it is. So, unless you're a detractor, then you think it's an ant, and they just got carried away with the leg. So, doesn't make sense to me. Okay. A few more dinosaurs. And again, they've got these strange, odd circles on them. And the one guy, here's a better picture. One guy says they can't be real because they don't have feathers. Well, here's some actual fossil or impression from the skin of a Triceratops. And notice this little thing here. Does that look more like the circle thing that whoever drew in the picture on the rock is like? Here's another image. But I don't see any feathers on there. So, then here's a whole bunch of dinosaurs together, having a party or something. So, I don't know. I believe them, I think they are. But as Answers in Genesis shows, we may not want to be talking to unbelievers about it. Necessarily the Ica stones or the Nazca lines, I think they're fascinating. There's going to be more stuff we can learn from it, but just be careful of what they're labeling as truth and what the experts are saying. Speaking of experts, I was going to say this earlier, but a lot of us saw, in fact, we prayed about it this morning, about the collapsed submarine, the Titan, and the Navy, hearing about that. I had to do a rant on Facebook with this stuff because the thing about the sound that the Navy heard, and they say it took 4 days to report, it probably took them quite some time to analyze it. They probably recorded the sound, but you don't hear that very often. They don't automatically say, I know what that is. Because then they had to isolate it as to what it was going on with associated events. But the thing that irritated me was that the press, I saw several, because I was interested in what was going on with the little sub. But I watched several of them, and they brought these experts in, and the first thing that the expert would say was, I'm no expert in this field, but, and then they'd ask them a question like they were the expert and trying to push for their scenario. And I just got so tired of that. Experts don't know everything. So, okay. And in addition to the rocks and the lines, there's a whole bunch of pottery that have dinosaurs on them. And we're not even going to go into that. Okay? But for those who want to steer us away from the truth, they will find truth eventually. Hell is truth known too late. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Holy God, again, we thank you for truth. We thank you for teaching us and giving us brains that we can think and giving us the ability to think for ourselves. And we thank you for just all that we can learn together. And thank you especially for your word that teaches the ultimate truth and for what you've done for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody.